Okay, so it's now time to welcome Antoinette, Klatzky, and Otto Scharmer. Ladies and gentlemen, please make a round of applause for them. Hi again.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you so much for being here. How are you feeling today?
Thanks for having us. Feeling good, feeling excited for our talk and to share together.
I had an idea while we were sitting right before. If you're okay, I would love to start. I need to introduce you first. Sorry, they're so famous that I don't need to introduce them, but maybe it's better. So Antoinette, you're the Vice President of Programs and Partnerships of the Eileen Fisher Foundation and board member and senior faculty at the Presencing Institute. And Otto Scharmer, you are the co-founder of the Presencing Institute, author of Theory U, and you are an action researcher who co-creates innovations in learning and leadership that you deliver through many classes in many different institutes, among which the Presencing Institute at the MIT. Is that right? Okay. So my idea was, since you're addressing inner change, I've noticed throughout the years that inner change and especially the interest in human beings and transformation never comes from nowhere. There's usually events in a life that brings you here. So rapidly, if I may say, we have time, but I know we have many more subjects. I know it's very personal, so again, I will let you tell us whatever you want. You don't have to go too deep if you don't want to, but what happened in your life that brought you to being so interested in inner transformation and raising the level of consciousness? Antoinette.
Oh, okay. Great. Well, hello, everyone. Jump into my life story, shall we? So I didn't know where to start. You just asked me this question and I felt like, okay, birth, pre-birth, I don't know. But on the one hand, I grew up with a single mother in New York, and I have a multi-ethnic background. And so I think for me, growing up, I think I came in with, everybody says I was a happy baby, but I think I came in also with a lot of anger. And the other side of anger is also passion. So a lot of people who see me, there's like a fierceness and a joy in that. But when I was quite young, I was trying to figure it out. Like, who am I in this world? And who am I? Particularly, I went to a very white Jewish day school. And I was, in the summer especially, not very white. And so I was really trying to figure out who am I as a young little person of color, and in a world that didn't look like me, and with a mom who didn't look like me. And so I think that was an early place of this kind of consciousness of who am I, and also seeing myself as a bridge builder between worlds. So recognizing that I wasn't only from this one place, that I was actually more than just this one place, and that I could probably connect with a lot more people than just the family that I was born into. And so I kind of had this experience of there's something deeper than this. There's an interconnection, there's a oneness, and also, understanding that I wasn't just my mother's religion or my father's. There was something that was deeper from a spirit sense as well.
Otto, what happened in your life that brought you to get so interested in humankind?
Hello, everyone. So for me, I was born on and grew up on a regenerative farm, a biodynamic farm, and kind of the core organizing idea was so in a context I grew up, there was some spiritual awareness, right? Nature is not just a dead body, not just a resource, also not just a living system, but it has a beingness, and it's there are ways of connecting with that. So that was always a little bit part of the vocabulary. Then I grew up in Germany of the 1970s and 80s. There was the first wave, really, of the environmental movement, and then the peace movement. I was a quite active part of that, and so through a number of experiences, realize that what is really animating any kind of movement is a felt sense of a future possibility that's very, very different to what we see now. And it's acute, so what you sense as a future possibility, to some degree, it's not an idea. It to some degree is more real than kind of the outer reality you meet there. So it was a very it was very ordinary, I would say, because I wasn't special. It was just like what the context I grew up in, and I would say that is an important gateway into what today I call presencing, because I think I already met that as something very, very ordinary that many people who are part of any kind of movement already experience. A felt sense of future possibility that I do not have to explain with long lectures to the person marching next to me on the streets. So there's this shared seeing and sensing, I think was another context for me. And then later I went to MIT, and there was also then the 90s, there was a lot of, I thought this is such a powerful, also generational movement, that will change everything pretty much now, right? That wasn't exactly what happened. And then I wondered, so where are all these people, right? So what happened to them, right? And then I arrived at MIT, and it was a real eye-opener, because I participated in what back then MIT's Peter Senge had organized as an organizational learning center. And I was very clear, it wasn't an accident, right? I picked that place because I picked up from the writing not the word spirituality, but an openness between the lines to that deeper dimension of consciousness-based change.
It wasn't written, but you could feel it.
Yeah, not the vocabulary, but you could feel the openness. It was kind of, alluded to or described in other ways. That's why I wanted to be there. And to me, now, that deeper dimension, and then I arrived at the first workshop with the companies, and it was such an eye-opener to me that what they did is creating very different learning opportunities that not were mentally, but really that went into much deeper levels of connection and reflection and collective self-reflection. And it was interesting. You see that one moment and kind of a whole new world goes out. Oh, that's possible too, right? So it opens in your own mind a whole other field of possibility. And I also felt kind of some things that were missing then. And I'm just kind of looking at Arana sitting over there. I met her a few years later, right? And so I knew, so I always had this idea, we need to bring the awareness, but also the art and social arts dimension more into these deeper transformational learning environments. Because otherwise it's just sitting in the head. And meeting Arana was in that way a life-changing moment for me, because I instantly saw, I knew what needed to happen, but I couldn't do it alone.
What needed to happen? Self-awareness. What needed to happen?
Basically a totally different holding space that allows transformation to happen, not just individually, but on a collective level. And when I say on a collective level, the word that I'm today would use for that is on the level of the social field. That means on the level of how we relate to one another. the qualities of relationship, right? The amount of boundaries that separate us or that we are able to melt down. And those are environments that you can create and that have a profound impact on how you collaborate. So one of the skills, how you co-create and how you converse and communicate with each other. So I guess what I'm saying is the gateway for me was through social context and through noticing the deeper level of experience that comes up for me when you go out into the world and engage with the world. If you pay attention to the deeper level of experience that is evoked by that, that is an important gateway for transformation that not only happens on the level of one person, another person, but that happens on the level of the whole system, or to use this different word, a social field. What is a social field? It is a system with a soul, right? It is a system with an interior dimension. And that interior dimension can be cultivated, not just on the level of the individual, but on the level of the whole.
So that's what we're going to discuss right now. Thank you. It was such a good intro to our subject. It's shifting, right? Or am I the only one thinking that? I feel like it's shifting, and politicians and system thinkers and scientists and you at the Presencing Institute, lots of people understand now that, again, we won't change the world if we don't change our posture, our inner world, ourselves. You've been with Ahawana and other, obviously, in advance on the subjects. Now we start to realize, but you were talking about that 30 years ago, which sounds crazy to me, apart from Buddhists. I don't know who was addressing those subjects. What do you do to address, we've seen before with Eric, the inner development goals. How do you address this inner shift, this inner transformation through your work with the inner development goals? Antoinette.
So, you know, I'm thinking about this experience that you asked and where we are now. And for me, just bridging some of my little life story to how we do that now, I think, you know, this experience of activating social fields is a big part of how we do that. So, you know, how do we actually activate what Otto was just sharing about? And I think many of us in this room have done that in a lot of different ways. And so for me, you know, yesterday actually, Rob Hopkins, who you held the session with yesterday from Transition Network, he was talking about this experience of the longing. So this idea of having a longing, and that if we can cultivate the longing that we feel, that that will shape history. And I think in a lot of ways, you know, so Otto and I not most recently, but in 2020 during the pandemic early moments, we were planning a global forum, which the Presencing Institute had been running for close to 10 years at that point. And we had this moment where we said, we're not going to be able to do this the way that we thought. We are not going to be able to do a 200-person in-person in Berlin. So what are we going to do? And the initial thought was, let's just postpone. Let's just, you know, the team was kind of like, let's just push it off, because it'll only last a few weeks. Hindsight is 2020, right? But actually, at that moment, Otto and I both felt, what if we did it now? What if we just did this online and now? And actually, what's needed now is to activate this social field and to activate this connection that we have with each other. And so Otto sent me this little, we were doing a description back and forth, and he sent the title. And it was Global Activation of Intention and Action, Gaia. And I was like, that's it. That's what we're doing. That's what's happening. That's what we're doing. And I think that moment was, we had been kind of building these online courses. Otto had a massive open online course through MIT. It continues to exist, called ULab. And that has been an incredible activator of over 200,000 people around the world. And in that moment of of 2020, of the pandemic, of global activation of intention and action, we realized that we thought maybe 1,000 people will show up, that 13,000 people in a moment said, this is exactly what we need in our communities. And being here in Paris and with our colleagues here in France who immediately picked up on it. There are, communities that immediately said, how do we translate this? How do we make this right for our region and our place? And so there's just incredible language track leaders who came up out of the woodwork, an incredible team in the Presencing Institute, many of whom are here, who immediately got activated and said, how do we not just kind of move into action right away, but do the inner work to set an intention, to listen to each other, to activate our communities around a shared intention, and then move forward together. And that work has continued to move into different contexts, communities, organizations,
It might sound like a simple question, but why is it important to set a common intention as a group?
I mean, for me, my experience is that that setting where this is my experience, but this is also built on the work of Otto and the Presencing Institute, is that where we put our attention is where our energy is going to go. And so setting an intention, stating where we're moving towards, setting that as an individual, setting that for our community is actually surfacing. It's not just making something up. It's surfacing something that we're moving towards so we can all see it together. And when we start to see it together, we can bring our attention to it together, and then we can start moving towards it.
It's as simple as this. Otto.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way of putting it. And so intention really, if attended to, can serve as an attractor, right, for energy, for possibilities, and for co-creativity. If it's done as a shared intention. And
Even more
so you could say that in many ways what is mindfulness and meditation and all this inner work, it's about realigning attention and intention. And how do you transform a social field? You realign attention and intention on the level of the whole, on the level of what we do together. So those are kind of practices that often don't exist through the existing traditions, and where we need to develop new methods and tools and spaces where we can develop that. And that's essentially what in the Presencing Institute, the past took that Arana and I and Antoinette and others co-founded, where we try to build methods, tools, and spaces that are scalable. In other words, that can be democratized, that can be made accessible to everyone and not just to small groups.
How do you do that? How do you scale? How do you democratize?
So, for example, in ULab, which is like a MOOC, an open online platform, that was based on MITx. We had, so it's free, it's open, it's available to everyone. We have that for all of our tools. More than 200,000 people participated in this journey. But that, of course, the old MIT structure is one to many, right? So that's kind of how knowledge is. So we know, right? And here it's everyone. And of course, that's not how a social field is shifting, right? And so we needed, with the Presencing Institute, to complement that side with community organizing tools that you, in your own context, in your own place, can form your own community, your own hub, your own initiative. And that has happened really across the planet and across the planet in thousands of places. And that's kind of has activated an ecosystem of change. So just to continue the story that Antoinette was sharing, because it does move to the larger question I think we are talking about, how does this happen in institutions, if it ever does, right?
Yeah.
So, in the story that Antoinette was referencing, the Gaia story, which is interesting for the following reason. Usually when people think about transformation and so on, like it's a long process and you need to put in all these places and so on, that was not at all what we did. What we did is, because if you live in a moment of disruption, right, and the pandemic was kind of one version of that, and we know one thing about the future, more stuff is coming, right? So when you live in a moment of disruption, then what you need to do is to create a holding space to make sense together of what is arising from our experience. That's really what we did.
So it's like circles of people speaking?
Small circles through intentional stillness, through mindfulness practices, through social art practices, through individual reflection practices. Then, so there was usually an input, then there is a moment of stillness that you have together as a planetary community. You move into small groups from there. You often practice with social arts, kind of you use embodied ways of knowing, and then you come back together to share, like in a global dialogue, kind of what's emerging kind of from all these conversations. And all of that is captured with another social art form that we co-pioneered, which is together with Kelvin Bird, which is generative scribing. So you capture, and we had a version of that through Jace yesterday, who was also here, who created like an animated version thereof that allows you then to go through a process of mirroring, right? And a lot of accessing the deeper sources of knowing has to do with resonance. Has to do with paying attention to the deeper levels of resonance, the deeper level of experiences that we have. And the gateway to accessing that is stillness. So that's kind of why it doesn't happen automatically. You need to put in a minimal enabling structure. But when you do that, a lot is happening out of that. So one example was, one person contacted me and said, hey, I'm in the UN and that's exactly what we need now, right? So we were about, these kinds of sessions, right, across the UN.
Yeah.
Can you do that? So we talked, and we created a little prototype, and then together with the people who showed up, we designed how that is workable for the UN. It was really interesting that it was thousands of people participated. It was kind of across the whole journey. And many people told us in the UN that they were shocked that they could have these interior dimensions, these inner conversations, right, in a UN context. Because obviously, so what happens, of course, is that there is like this organizational discourse, very rational, very kind of strategy, intervention, this and that. And then whatever is the interior dimension is totally separate of that. Many people have that. Right? Many people have like this deeper, but it's not part.
They don't listen to it. They dismiss it.
It's not part of what happens in meetings.
Yeah.
And so they were really shocked to see these elements coming together. And it went on into many countries and many different interventions. But that's, all of that is arising from very minimal interventions that create holding spaces to attend to what's emerging from the current moment.
But how, because obviously they will create that inner space through whatever experience you're offering while you're there. How do you make sure they continue when you're gone in the United Nations or wherever else?
Yeah, and I mean, there's a number of different ways that they continue, but in part, there's an online platform that people can be using. And often the coaching circles or the connections that people make, because they're small groups and because they're small connections, then they continue that on together. And in the UN work that the Presencing Institute was able to continue, there were SDG leadership labs where we had our facilitators in partnership with country leaders in the UN, so they could continue working with their teams, building out retreats. I think you just were in Colombia, continuing to work with them. So there are several interventions that people started to take their own teams and then start to do that in their own experiences, because they built more capacity inside themselves to be able to then hold others to be able to do that kind of work.
Do you want to?
So the SDG Leadership Labs, were created in 26 countries, so that's 20% of the UN country teams or the humanitarian teams that have to respond to crisis situations. And I think it's an example of two types of interventions, how you can use work with inner development goals or with the consciousness side of change. One is you bring them together like in an open dialogue format or kind of under the header of like inner development goals or something like that. The other one is you come together, so you flip it, right? You come together in the context of the change that you want to create together. So in this case, the UN country teams, it was either the SDG agenda, kind of that was relevant for that specific country team, or it was the humanitarian country team with a crisis situation that needed an immediate response. In that case, you create like the convening space and the shared space of awareness around that challenge, around that aspiration, and all the inner development dimension, right, the relational and the consciousness dimension comes in on the how side. How we are going on a journey that will allow us to address that more effectively and in a different way. So that's a very different way of, so there's, when you convene around consciousness, please come here, right? That's a smaller group than the one that comes together around shared challenges. And a lot what we need to learn together as a community of change makers is how we create awareness, so collective action from shared awareness. In other words, how we bring together multiple stakeholders that agree on many things and that come with very different interests around a shared situation and help them to move them from a silo view to a systems view. So to help them to move from seeing it just from my angle to a shared, deepened awareness of the whole situation, of what's emerging, what's wanting to happen, which then allows that group to collaborate and co-create in a much more fluid and flexible way, which is actually the more necessary, the more the old system is collapsing. And that's exactly what's happening now.
Maybe just to build on that a little bit, so my context is that I work inside Eileen Fisher, which is an ethical apparel designer and has 60 stores across the United States. Anyway, 30 plus years in operation. And when you say this bit about the siloed view, and when we think about how do you have sustainability across a company, or how do you actually move towards designing a regenerative business, which I talked about earlier today, how do you actually break down those barriers? And when you talk about collective action from shared awareness, it's these kinds of small connections that happen across the company, where you have somebody who works in supply chain speaking with somebody who works in packaging, speaking with somebody who works in marketing, and these connections, we now have a people and planet committee inside the company. I could be in the foundation completely siloed in my own work. I would be just doing grant making and doing the things that foundations do in their, we'll just do this charity work over here. And it's through my work with the Presencing Institute over the last over 10 years is that I broke down those barriers inside myself. I, as a foundation executive, should do X, Y, Z. And I realized that my job is actually not about working just for this organization and doing the job that somebody thinks that I should do, but it's really about connecting to who I am on planet Earth, going back to your earlier question, and what is the deepest contribution that I can make to the world through where I am right now. And that's what I've seen in the UN leaders as well, is this question of who am I, who is my highest self, and what is the work that I'm here to do on planet Earth? And those are the questions that I was asked when I first came into this work. And I think that's really shaped and guided my ability to be creative and our ability to be creative and co-creative together, and move us towards that kind of, oh, we can take collective action when we can see and sense and feel what's needed, what our shared longing is, and what's possible. And we can start working towards that together.
That's an amazing final word. And Otto, unless you have a final word to share with the audience, because we're over time now.
Well, I would say we all know what's ahead of us is not necessarily easy. We all know, and it's not going to be easy. We all know that we live in a moment of real, we are at a bifurcation point where things can move one way or another. And that what will make the difference in a bifurcation point are very small things. It could be very few people like us and our capacity to show up together or not in moments like that. I think that's kind of there was never a moment on this planet before where those alive on the planet and the actions they take or not has such a profound impact on all the generations to come. So we happen to be around now, and I think what my closing, what my closing word is that I feel, so sometimes maybe you can feel a little bit like the sense of collective depression that is so much around us. And something that helps me to, but that's what I feel here when I think about all the trends, but it's not what I experience here. And I think what helps to stabilize that is just the imagination, how many, not only of past generations, but also future generations are looking at us now. And the awareness for profound change is already there. Sandrine quoted that, right? 3 out of 4 people in the G20 countries support well-being economies, support transformational change. And yet, most people don't know exactly how to do that. And I think so the awareness is there. It's beginning to pop up. It's beginning to manifest as a global movement, but it's a global movement that's not aware of itself, right? That manifests with 1,000 names, 1,000 faces, and that isn't amplified to the degree it could. What is amplified today is the noise, aka social media, but what is not amplified is kind of this awakening that's happening across the planet. And I think where I see our, and I think our probably includes everyone here, role is to create these supporting infrastructures, right? These holding spaces where this awareness that's already there can manifest in new kind of relationships and in new kind of collective actions. And the way that I think is showing up today is through a top-down and a bottom-up strategy. And on the bottom-up strategy, Antoinette shared the Gaia online story. We did a lot of online, And what we believe today is that the future of online is offline. It's place-based gatherings that activate this deeper dimension of connection at scale in all world regions. And that's what we are working on now.
Thank you very much, Otto and Antoinette. A big round of applause for them
Thank
too.
you all.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the day at ChangeNOW. Thank you so much.